Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight for our I-93 Bridge Park Feasibility and Conceptual Design presentation tonight. So hopefully some of you were here last year when we started this process, the feasibility study. We have VHB, our partners tonight. We'll introduce them in a second, here to present sort of the outcome. We had you come last year and you were challenged to think big. So just keep that in mind when you see the products that are going to be coming before you. Concord, I was at a Creative Concord meeting this morning, and a big discussion was, how do we define Concord as a community? What's our image? And we're thinking of different ways artistically to do that. Walkability, bikeability, these are all sort of the things that we think about when we think about Concord and things that we're moving towards. So this is a type of project that fits within that. When we started this project, it was a very different political financial climate that we were in, where there was infrastructure grants aplenty. So something like this really seemed possible at that time. We don't know where we're going to end up in the coming years, but this is a feasibility study. If you think of the Merrimack River Greenway Trail, we did the feasibility study in the early 1990s, and we just built phase 1 5 years ago. So we have these things so we can picture a vision and what we can sort of go towards. So 5-10 years from now, when there's programs out there, we like to have something ready and we could say, hey, there's a grant out there for this. We have this beautiful project. Let's go out there and continue beyond this feasibility study. So that's the phase that we're at right now. It's not in the CIP to be built in the next 10 years. It'll only get built with outside funding. So we're not sure what that outside funding looks like at this point in time, but we'll keep looking for it because you'll see this is a really cool project. It's really exciting what they came up with. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Beth Fenstermacher, Director of Special Projects with Community Development in Concord for the City of Concord. We have Greg Backus and Stephanie Kiza from VHB. We have our Mayor, Councilor Kretovic, in the peanut gallery in the back. So questions for them, they're here. So I'll pass it over to Greg and Stephanie. They'll present the project to you, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Beth. Just show of hands, who was here at the last meeting? Wow, great. All right, I like it. So I don't have to go into too much history here. I will go through a little history, and then we're going to kind of reiterate what we heard at that last meeting, what we believe the vision was coming out of that meeting. We'll talk about opportunities and constraints and design considerations. We will also present alternatives that we looked at and a cost analysis to go along with those, and then we'll open it up for discussion. This is a small group, so if anybody has questions, feel free to stop me. Just put your hand up, but we'd like to reserve the actual discussion until the end. Oh, and I should mention, VHB is managing, and we developed a lot of the work here, but we had a partner. We had an architectural firm that we've worked with before called Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, SOM. And they're the ones that did the fancy drawings. We can't take credit for some of the beautiful work they did. Just a little bit of the history. You can see going all the way back to 1992. There was an early charrette along the Merrimack River. Fast forward a couple steps here, there was the Opportunity Corridor Master Plan, where some of these things were envisioned, and then the 2008 Concord Master Plan. And then closer to now, we have some things that have come forward. The Merrimack River Greenway Trail is in great shape, moving forward, being developed. The city is also doing the Merrimack River Recreation and Open Space Corridor, which includes recreational facilities as well as the trail. The Loudon Road Bridge is noteworthy because that is still scheduled to move forward to be rehabilitated and expanded to include bike ped facilities in the near term. And then, of course, the Bow Concord project, which is in the background and is still scheduled to move forward. So the vision, some of the things we heard at the last meeting was to span over the railroad and the highway corridors to access the river, create an attractive public space with views of the Merrimack River, do something to reduce noise, resulting from the widened interstate and eventually increased traffic. Include vegetation and pedestrian amenities on the structure if possible. Connect to the Merrimack River Greenway Trail from downtown, which would really be, well, it's actually on the other side of the river. Provide space for social mixing. That's one of the things we heard. This isn't just a transportation facility. It's a place for people to gather and to meet each other from different sides of the river. Create an attractive statement as the gateway to the capital city. Whatever we do here would be visible. You've got, whatever it is, 100,000 vehicles going through here on a weekend, and all of a sudden they're going to look up and see something interesting instead of just the highway. We considered opportunities, enhancing the visual connectivity to the river from the downtown side. This is actually an image from the Opportunity Corridor Master Plan from way back. It showed high-end development on the city side, a span over the railroad and the highway. This one didn't go across the river. It landed on the bank of the river, but similar kind of an idea. Another opportunity is to provide space on the deck high above the river that would give views out onto the river. And then the bridge portion would provide river views and a bike ped connection between one side and the other. So there are a lot of constraints. I think we showed this map at the last meeting. We documented down below here property ownership. So yellow is private property, orange is railroad, blue is state. And if you're trying to get from Store Street or Main Street to the river, you can see there's no city property to do that. The green over here is city property, the park. But so early on in the process, we met with property owners, the primary property owners, and we were, I'd say, afraid at the beginning on how we would be received. Surprisingly, it was a warm welcome. The property owners saw this as an opportunity to bring maybe some more life to their businesses. Some of them actually have redevelopment plans that this could fit in nicely with. So we went into it kind of skeptical, and we came out with a lot of hope. There's also physical constraints, infrastructure constraints. You have the existing and the proposed I-93 that you have to get over, the CSX railroad corridor. There are some utility lines, high power utility lines that unfortunately are right at the elevation that we're going to be coming over the highway at. So we have to deal with that. And then there's also the Loudon Road Bridge, which is actually kind of an amenity. So some of the other considerations were access. We want it to be convenient. If we just build something that people can't get to, it's not really worth it, right? So we want it to also be attractive so they will come out there. We want the connectivity, the MRGT, as we mentioned. At the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion about what kind of amenities would go on the structure and the deck park. Everything from food vendors to a butterfly museum to, there was all kinds of ideas on what could go out there. We didn't get deep into that. We're just looking at providing a space that eventually could be programmed. There was concern about security. Some of these structures are quite long, and people want to be able to feel safe if they're going to venture out there. So there has to be good lighting. There has to be a lot of use. The more people out there, the safer you feel, and probably security systems. Aesthetics was a high consideration. It's going to be so visible to the people in the city as well as all these people passing through. A rudimentary bridge wasn't going to cut it. So that's why we have this architect on board. We want to make a statement. And of course, cost is a huge consideration. There's also environmental considerations. It would definitely take a rigorous permitting process, doing work in the river. We cannot span the whole river. There's going to have to be piers in the river. The permitting for that alone would be interesting. There's conservation easements on the east side of the river. The first 100 feet of land when you go ashore is protected. And then Healy Park, if we were to use Healy Park at all, there's concerns with some of the existing contamination there. So physical considerations. This is a image of a cross section starting at Main Street. This is the plan view down here. That yellow line is where we cut the cross section through this whole area. So starting at Main Street, you're kind of high. You come down to Store Street. You've got the Brixmore development, the plaza. You need to be 22 feet over the railroad with any structure. You get that utility line right there. And then you have to be 17 and a half feet over the highway. And then you need to get over across the river. So there's a lot of height differential here. If you're out here over the highway, you're actually going to have a great view because you're going to be very high. But you're not going to get down to the river. I just put this up. This is one of the latest images of the 93 corridor improvements. We're looking at coming from Stores somewhere across the highway. And we spent a fair amount of time evaluating different locations to cross, looking at elevation, looking at property ownership, looking at trying to keep it as short as possible for cost. And then Steph can talk about the alternatives.
Okay, so we considered 3 different alternatives. The first alternative is a multi-use bridge spanning over the railroad, I-93, and the river. And we had 2 sub-alternatives as part of that effort, looking at 2 different alignments. The second alternative was taking one of those bridge alignments and then considering adding a deck park connected to it. And then the third alternative was looking at essentially depressing a section of I-93 and building an expansive park over the top of it. This is an overall plan. This is an overall plan looking at the entire study area, which initially was, we considered the area between exit 13 to the south and exit 14 to the north. Ultimately, we concentrated our efforts in this area closer to the northern end, basically because there were better opportunities for connectivity to downtown through there, and because the river crossing was physically shorter, which would cut down on cost. Actually, if I go to the next slide, I can zoom in. So alignment 1 to the south, it starts here on Store Street. We chose this location because it connects to Theater Street, and that allows a connection to Main Street downtown. And we're south of the Brixmore Plaza. Essentially, this block of retail buildings prevents us from having anything in this area. It's just not feasible to assume that building will be going away anytime soon. Alternative 2, or alignment 2, is to the north of the plaza. It lines up with Dubois Ave, which also right here, it's hard to see on the graphic, there's a public alley here, which would be the connection to Main Street and downtown. This graphic also shows the connectivity to the MRGT, Merrimack River Greenway Trail right here, which is recently under construction, and it connects further to the south this direction. Actually, if I go back, you can see that the yellow line here, and this is a proposed future boardwalk connection as well that will tie in. And then to the north, this is also, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, a future phase of the MRGT. which will connect to the planned 14-foot wide multi-use path that's going alongside Loudon Road. So there's a lot of connectivity in this area, a lot of options for bike and ped access. Getting back to the alignments. So zooming into alignment 1, this is the one that's south of the Brixmore Plaza. The total structure length is 3,000 feet, which is just over half a mile. It's fairly long. And the river crossing alone is 430 feet. So we turned this alignment down to the south a bit before crossing over the tracks, the highway, and the river for a number of reasons. One of which being we wanted to minimize impacts to the operations of these properties, their parking, circulation, and access. This alternative allows us to place the path in a grass strip with minimal impacts to parking. There are impacts to the driveway entrance here, but we're able to propose a revised entrance further to the south that will mitigate that. Another reason, if you can see these dashed lines here and these circles, it's a little hard to see. These are existing utility poles with overhead wires. We're trying to minimize conflicts with those as much as possible. There is a line, poles, and wires running here that ultimately will have to be impacted by the project, either de-energized or placed underground. That would be evaluated if the project were to move forward. And another reason is to avoid impacts to this existing building here. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, we needed enough space to ramp up to get over the different features. This is the railroad corridor, I-93, and then the river. Moving to the next slide. This is a profile view of the same alignment. This is Store Street on this end. And as you can see, we ramp up pretty quickly at a 3.8% grade. And I'll note this profile view is exaggerated. It's not, it looks very steep, but it's an exaggerated vertical scale. So we ramp up. This is where the rail crossing is, where we have to have a clearance of 22.5 feet over the rail line. And this is where the proposed I-93 project is. We have to have a minimum of 17.5 feet clearance over that. And then we start to ramp back down over the river. Right here is where the path would cross over the Merrimack River Greenway Trail. We need at least a 10-foot clearance over that. And then we tie back into existing ground over here. The different colors on this graphic that you're looking at, the light gray represents areas of fill material with some retaining walls. The dark gray represents a bridge structure with piers placed every few hundred feet or so. And then the brown represents a boardwalk structure on piles. And the reason we're proposing boardwalk is this area on the eastern bank of the river is subject to flooding, and we want to have as limited fill in the floodplain as possible. Moving along, taking a closer look at alignment 2. This is just north of the Brixmore Plaza. So we start just to the north of, I believe this is the Bank of America building. And we are utilizing a current access drive, but looking at the circulation through these properties, we think that it wouldn't too negatively impact their operations. They could have new access points, and they could work around this. I mean, if we move forward with this, there'd obviously have to be a lot of coordination with them, but it seemed like the least impactful to operations. And then we skirt around and hug the property line with the railroad. Again, it's impacting an access drive here, but we feel that there's plenty of other options for vehicles to circulate this property. And we did peel away before we got behind the building because we did want to maintain access back here to the loading docks and for emergency vehicles. We're pulling this alignment away to the south a bit too, similar to the other one, for the same reason that we needed room to ramp up to get over the different features. This alignment also, we're crossing at a skew, mainly because we need to avoid, these are high tension power lines here, this dash line, and right here and right here are very large utility pole structures that we do not want to impact if at all possible. This alignment total length is 2,000 feet, which is just under half a mile, and the river crossing in this location is 400 feet. Moving along to the profile view, it's a very similar looking profile to the previous alignment. This is Store Street here. We ramp up slightly steeper grade, just given the geometry and the constraints. The same clearance requirements over the railroad and the highway. We start to ramp down over the river, maintaining the 10 feet over the MRGT, and then down again for the boardwalk on the eastern side. This is a graphic that depicts the typical cross-section on the pedestrian bridge structure, or the shared use path bridge structure, with the intent that the right side would be designated for cyclists with 10 feet, 5 feet in each direction, and then the left-hand side would be designated for pedestrians. An optional intermittent 4 feet wide seating area with a total clear width of 24 feet. And this is very large, very wide compared to a traditional standard shared use path bridge, which they're often, anywhere from 10 to 14 feet if you're just looking to accommodate bikes and peds without all the amenities. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and he's going to talk through some of the other efforts that went into the.
So Steph just mentioned what the desired width of the structure would be. And part of that came out of what we heard at the first meeting. Because the bridge is so long, people were really concerned what it would feel like if it was very narrow. They likened it to a tunnel effect and that kind of thing. So we opened it up to the 24-foot clear width. So it's more usable by all users. You're going to have walkers, runners, bicyclists on the same structure and feel comfortable. So then we started looking at, well, what kind of bridge? And we looked at a range of different types, steel girders, box beams, trusses. The truss is interesting. It's actually a fairly efficient structure. It's really reflective of a railroad type bridge, which doesn't really work necessarily in this environment. It's not really what we're going for aesthetically. We all love the cable stay bridge. Think of the Zakim Bridge in Boston. Think of multiples of cost. So we didn't do that. Stressed ribbon, similar thing. There are very few of those around. They're really beautiful, but extremely costly to build and maintain. And then similar to the truss, you could do an arch type structure, which again was nice, but we weren't sure it was really representative of Concord in this setting. The girder, the steel girder number one, is the most efficient from a cost perspective. So we said, well, what can we do with an efficient bridge to make it look good? But first, this is what it would look like if you just went your basic 24-foot wide steel structure. And this is what we're trying to avoid. High fencing over here because you're going to be over the highway. very rudimentary. So when we did our cost estimate, we started with this. We costed out what it would be, a structure like that, to cross the river and everything else. And then the architects got a hold of it. And this is actually one that they designed. And we got a lot of inspiration from this. They showed us all kinds of examples they've done. And we kind of came back to something like this. It's still a steel structure with a different railing system, basically. The railing system is the big difference. And then incorporating plantings, incorporating lighting, incorporating seat walls. So this is it. This is the first view that we're going to show you of the southern alignment. This is how it would appear from the air. And we kicked it around a lot, and then we said, you know what? How does this work in New Hampshire? Does it work here? And think about the profile of that railing looking like the gateway to the mountains. All right, it has kind of that effect. And it's high over the railroad and over the highway, but then over the river, it gets down to a normal height of a railing so that you can see the river. That's a view from the highway, how it would appear. Now you notice they left openings between the rails, like the one that we saw, the real one that they showed us. The only downside with this is we're really concerned with the noise, the user experience up on the bridge. And we would want to fill in those gaps potentially with a glass or some type of poly so it's still see-through, but try to deaden the noise. This is a rendering of what it would look like on the deck. This is facing the east as you're starting to go over the river. Just an aerial view looking down with the highway down below. Again, that's that 24-foot width. This is out over the river where the railings are lower, but still with the plantings, still with the seat wall. And then the bike versus the pedestrian is obviously delineated by just the material types and the color and the striping. This is once you're across the river, starting to go through the woods before you get into the fields. So we're also charged with doing a deck, a park. So this is adding a feature to that same bridge, which is essentially a park shaped like the Starship Enterprise, but it's there you go. Representative, no, it's not Representative Concord. So one of the differences, I think, from what people might have been expecting, I think people at the first meeting were saying, put the deck over the highway, cover the highway. But we said, well, that's not really accomplishing much. It's not protecting the city from the highway. It's such a small space. It's going to be noisy for the users of the park. We really want to get people in touch with the river, so let's move it out. It's really a similar cost. It eliminates some of the concerns of having this over the highway from a maintenance and other perspective. And it gets people out on the river. And I kind of like the way that the shape, like this wall or this edge here, faces people out up that direction of the river, and then this one faces them downstream. So we thought the design was innovative. It can take any shape, but instead of just putting a square over a highway, they took it out over the river. And this southern alignment takes advantage of where the stream bank actually starts to get kind of wide. So it's not all over water. It's not at all over the highway. It's taking advantage of some of the land that's right there. So some of the ideas of what it could look like on top, this is facing east. This is looking from the high point on the bridge out towards the river. And because the trail goes down as you go out over the river, but they left part of a deck that's level up here. so that people standing here would now have a really great view over the railings because they're higher. It'd probably be a little rail, a safety rail, but anyway, you get the idea. That brown area would be level, and the trail itself has to start diving down towards the other side of the river. And then, you know, they took a guess at what kind of programming would be out there. Again, that's to be determined. And would it be lawn space or something else? You know, who knows? This is looking in the other direction, looking towards the west. You can see how that the brown area has some relief, and it has like steps into it that people can sit on and look out over the river. This is just looking down on it a little bit closer, and we estimated the area to be about 0.4 acres. And Beth gave me some facts about similar parks in the city, just for reference. Eagle Square at 0.43, Flesher Murphy Play Lot at 0.48, and then McKee Square Park in the middle of McKee Square is 0.53, just for reference. So you can kind of picture how big that really is. This is, again, looking towards the east as the path is descending, but the deck is staying high. Another view, they created this city model using real city blocks and city buildings. And they just wanted to make sure that we understood where the State House is in relation to it, and how there would actually be a view of the State House. I think that's a little exaggerated, but it's right there. So then the other alternative that we were asked to look at from the last meeting was covering the highway, depressing the highway, sort of like what was done in Boston with the Rose Kennedy Park. So we did that. We went from Loudon Road to the south, about as far as was at all practical, because you have to start coming out and going up to exit 13 to the south. And this would have to be totally flipped here, where the highway would go under Loudon Road and Loudon Road would come over. We had to deal with the ramps on both sides, and we developed a profile of what that deck would look like. So the deck itself is the green. The dash line up here is the existing ground today. And then this is the profile down here of the highway that would have to get underneath. So an important feature here is right here, that blue line, that is the 100-year flood elevation. And you know, this would be in what they call a boat section. It would not be exposed to the flood. However, we did meet with New Hampshire DOT, and that was a non-starter. They did not want to see their road below the flood elevation for good reason. We cut some cross sections through that area to show what it would have to look like. These are just cut at different locations along the deck. This one in particular shows where the river is in relation to the structure. It shows the correct number of lanes through here for the widened 93. Big structure, a lot of work. This would be hard to build if it was in the middle of Kansas, but you have an existing highway that's there in the way. So staging something like this would be extremely difficult. And then the costs. We had our senior bridge engineer took a deep dive on how to estimate the cost for these structures. And he compared to a number of other structures around the country, square foot costs, linear foot costs, the type of river construction. And he came back to us with some square foot costs to build just the deck, or I'm sorry, just the bridge, not the deck part, just the bridge. And adding the approaches, the raw cost is about $46 million. If we start adding the architectural amenities, we're at least another $7 million. There's going to be right-of-way costs, crossing the railroad, crossing private property. That's probably low. And then design permitting, and then construction phase administration, and then a subtotal, 62 million, adding 20% for good measure. And we didn't even add escalation because we don't know how many years we're going out. But we're at 75 million for that southern bridge structure with the architectural amenities. No deck park. Adding the deck park up in here using similar unit costs brings the raw cost to 68 million. Adding architectural amenities to the bridge, and really bottom line 114, call it 115 million. So just to put it in perspective, oh, and I should mention that we didn't even price this. Where it was a non-starter with DOT, we knew it would be many multiples of the other structures, so we didn't even take a shot at it. I will say that this probably is the greatest solution. There's a lot of benefits, right? I mean, huge space. You are hiding the highway for a big piece of it, depressing noise. You have a decent edge along the river. You're not really connecting to it, but you can see it a lot better. You're not 30 feet up. So there are a lot of pros. It's just, it's daunting, and it's a non-starter. So our next steps are to make a similar presentation to City Council, summarize our findings in our report. But before we do that, we want to hear your input. So I'm happy to go back to any slides. If you have any questions, yes?
Do you have an artist's conception of the cable stay bridge?
We did not do a really detailed one. We did look early on at the costs of a cable stay with the kind of spans we're talking about, and it's significantly higher. And cable stay bridges, they have a very high long-time maintenance cost as well. The cables have to be inspected annually or whatever. But we did not do a rendering of it. There are a number of other ones around that we looked at. Yes.
Are the Loudon Road improvements for bike paths, you have to say, are those going to happen regardless? But they are going to happen.
They are going to happen.
They're not connected to this.
No, they're I think 2 to 3 years out, and they're happening. Yep. Yep. Again, it's a 14-foot wide multi-use path.
Have you checked with the rowing club lately? Do they like having a bridge across the bridge?
I haven't heard from them. Funny, because we know some of them, but haven't heard that. Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of bicyclists and walkers and runners, particularly runners, making this connection. I can see some really good loops forming, especially once we get the money to build the boardwalk and the rest of the MRGT. I think all this will be really great.
How do you see winter maintenance on that bridge?
It's a concern. Yeah. You'll have to be out there maintaining at least the pathway. Yeah. Yeah. And then begs the question, how much use will it get in the winter, right?
But at least it's wide enough to get a truck on there.
We did size it for vehicular passage, for maintenance, for emergency services, for ice cream trucks. Yep. Yep. Yes.
Did your cost analysis look at the idea of narrowing the bridge? I mean, by a factor of 2. Now, I'll probably not make any friends in the audience, but
Right.
if you took the bike path off the bridge and allowed the bike path to stay on the reconstructed Loudon Street Bridge, that would cut that amount of construction square footage by half.
Yeah.
And that might be a feasibility that would be worth the numbers alone.
It probably wouldn't be half, but it would be maybe 40%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But and then the question is, all right, is that going to be unattractive for people to go out there on a 10-foot wide structure, does it really accomplish what we're hoping? We want this to be, or I think you all want this to be more than just a transportation facility. I think we want it to be somewhere where people want to spend time too. And 10 feet really doesn't do that, or 12 feet.
Well, you'd still possibly have the amenity of a wide.
Of a deck,
area on the other
right.
side.
Yep.
I'm not saying not to do that,
Mhm.
but just the expense of the large span would be significant if you could take that out of the program. Yes, it is exciting for bikes, but there is perhaps a little bit of a conflict when that bike path is cutting off the spatial improvement of this amenity. From the most important is a nice view of the
Sure.
south of the river. So you could reposition those lands if you had to have them.
So I think this is a lead in to the funding discussion. We've talked about costs, we really haven't talked about funding. And I think Beth kind of hit on it, that the city's not going to put this in the CIP tomorrow. We're not in a really good environment to get huge federal grant. But it still is something that could be saved for the future and re-examined. And some of these ideas, how could we do it at half that cost and still have something? So some of these ideas will probably come out of it someday. So, yes.
Did you guys look at depressing the highway further than exit 14 past kind of up towards the 393 interchange and possibly opening that area up for development that could possibly offset bring some development to the area that would make it kind of extend downtown almost.
We didn't. We were tasked really to stick to exit 13 to 14 because that's where the river is.
Yeah. So,
But I hear what you're saying though. The whole commercial feasibility, maybe shared costs kind of thing.
yeah, so you'd have from Loudon Road south, it would be the deck park.
Yeah.
And then from north of Loudon Road, it would become
Commercial. Yeah.
buildings, departments.
Still very, very difficult and costly to depress the highway. We have exits that are very close together too, and the ramps have to be accounted for and all that. But yeah, no, it's the kind of feedback or ideas that we like to hear still. Anyone else? Yep.
Yeah, so the 14-foot wide multi-use path on Loudon Road,
Yes.
is that like one lane each direction for pedestrians or bikers?
It probably would be, whether they stripe it that way or not. I think in general, paths like that tend to develop in that way.
Okay.
But-
Because I love the idea of bridge park in any form, but it makes me wonder. I feel like my personal goal would be to get over to the east side of the river towards that MRGT area
Mhm.
to enjoy the patch of woods, the field, the view of the city. So maybe there'd be a way to expand a park over there, and not that the funding's forthcoming,
Right.
but if this money was put towards making that other side of the river a little more accessible for kids or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do love the idea, and if you're looking at the northern or southern options, I think the northern option for the bridge intersects Store Street in an area that I feel like more pedestrians would frequent.
Yes.
Instead of the southern one kind of buried behind the liquor commission.
Yep. We kind of agree. We started thinking the northern was the way to go. We'll get to it. So one of the advantages of this one, I think Steph mentioned it, we have a longer run up, which makes it flatter. But also we have some land to play with on this one, on the southern one. We really don't have that on the northern one. Right at the edge of the river. But I agree with you. This is more of a happening area. You're closer to Main Street.
Yeah, and if you want to get over to the plaza on the east side, like Buffalo Wild Wings or the post office, that gets you there faster if you want to avoid being next to busy Loudon Road, which
That's a good point.
can be loud all
Right.
directions.
The question is, where are you going on the east side, right? Is it just to the trail or is it to the activity on that side?
Yeah.
So you're probably right, yeah. The only counter to that is with the Loudon Road Bridge being improved, it's kind of redundant. You're that close to it, but
Yeah, that's the other issue.
you're right. We also, at one point, rather than touching down here, the streets go up pretty steeply over here. We were actually thinking of staying elevated and going over Store Street and connect up here. And one of the abutters here that we were working with was considering a redevelopment there, that could actually be a second story entrance, so. Anyone else? Plenty, yep. Jerry?
Question and I think a comment. The question is, I assume your scope was specific to a separate bridge across the river and over the highway? It was.
And that's what we heard from the public too, yeah.
So my comment was, I would hope someone could look into, and maybe just enhancing the Loudon Road crossing. I mean, even a separate bridge adjacent to Loudon Road, or even widening the Loudon Road Bridge, or enhancing the crossings. I'm imagining it would be a fraction of the cost, and could still kind of serve the purpose of connecting the two sides of the city.
Yep, appreciate that one. Again?
So you mentioned that you were nervous about approaching Brixmore Capital, the plaza owners. What exactly did they have to say about this project? Do you know what? Yeah.
Yep, we were there without, I guess, revealing any secrets. In general, they were open to the idea because they had some plans of redeveloping to some degree their plaza, and they were thinking, how could they bring the structure through their plaza? It was considered. It hasn't gone anywhere, but they were also seeing it as adding business to them. They saw the positives as opposed to the negatives.
Yeah.
So, but that was about it from early conversations. Yep. I think somebody back here. Yep. Go ahead.
First, a comment, which is just picking up a bit on the idea of narrowing it as a way to save money. That could also be designed with periodic bump outs and things, so you don't feel as if you're walking through a narrow
Right.
tunnel.
The whole way. Yeah.
Gives it some investment. But I had also wondered about what the idea of having the whole western side approach start farther up to the west.
Mhm.
And you alluded to that, but I didn't hear a reason as to why that wasn't pursued.
Yeah, we didn't go further. I think we were examining some of the property impacts on the other side of Store Street and how that would all work, as well as just we were trying to get down to grade as fast as possible to conserve cost. The more structure you have, the more long-term and initial costs you have. So, but it's like I was saying earlier, if somebody picks this up in the future, and if some of this redevelops, that might be more of an attractive solution. So,
Just because of its closer proximity to Main Street, or
we thought that would be better.
maybe a secondary ramp up that
Right.
is ADA, but at least other ways to access it.
Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, I had a question about alternative 3. I see other underground developments in other cities. Take Boston and Big, for example. That's way underwater. What's the problem with this? Why are the state objecting to that approach?
Yeah. To be underwater, you're committing to pumping forever. Whenever,
We're building a tunnel.
except for at the end. So whenever it rains over here, that water's coming in here. Whenever it rains over here, that water's coming in here. And you'll have to ask City of Boston, is the Big Dig waterproof? No, they're pumping. So DOT did not want to buy into that. And then just building it, this is mini big dig kind of thing. It's massive. Yeah.
No, I was just interested in the reason.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
I think for the South Bridge, I think there's a lot to be said for placemaking in just different colored sidewalk or stamped brick or something that goes. What's the street that lines up with Market Basket? Is that Fayette Street that goes down the hill?
Theater. Yeah.
I think like the sidewalk along one of those little downhill streets all the way out to the Southern Bridge could make like a really big difference in drawing like, oh, this is different. Like,
Yeah,
what's that?
true.
Even if you can't do the whole park,
Mm-hmm.
like.
Yeah, that's a good point. We early on when we were being scoped for this, this part of the project was not even in the cards. It was originally just get out over the river somehow, and I think the realization was you kind of need that component to get people out there, to give them a reason to pass through from both sides. So. Yes, Nicole.
Going back to the more northern alignment, I think that there's a lot of advantage to that for, as discussed before, it's closer to the destinations that people want to go and sort of counter to the idea of the Loudon Road Bridge being an alternative to that. The Loudon Road access point still has to cross the ramps for the highway, which as a parent of kids who are somewhat independent but not necessarily driving, and I would love for them to be active and when they move around the city rather than just driving when they have licenses, I'm never going to be as comfortable with them crossing an interstate ramp where drivers are simply not attuned to bicyclists and pedestrians as they are. They're totally separated here.
Thank you for that. The Loudon Road Bridge is not the end all.
Right.
It's not a separated facility like this. Right. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, what's on the right? You may have described that earlier. We arrived a little late. So what's on the right-hand side of the river there as we look at it?
So this is the development. Buffalo Wild Wings, Convene and MD.
So it's that farmland. Yeah.
This is farm.
And we just built the Greenway Trail.
Right. This trail was just constructed. Yeah. And to here. Sunflowers.
Lots of corn and something.
Yeah, right.
No more corn and lavender.
There's popcorn.
Yeah.
There's popcorn this year.
Yep. Did we catch it? Did we kind of reflect what we heard last time? That's really what we're here to hear.
Yeah.
Everybody bring a checkbook?
We'll be taking collections to play Powerball.
Right.
If anybody wins.
That's not enough.
That's true, it's not enough.
Yes.
So it seems as though the time to fund this is kind of passed, unfortunately, with the changing of administrations. It seems that the funding probably has run dry.
For 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's gut feel. Yeah. Well, thank you all. Stay tuned. Yeah.